This is Dr. Jessica Ashe, CEO of Global Mobility Nonprofit. And if you have seen any of my videos on mindset growth, you know that community service is one of my core values. Today, we're going to interview a renowned linguist who has founded his own branch of linguistics that is carried out by and for a community's self-empowerment, well-being, and prosperity. Dr. Ahmar Mahbub is an associate professor at the University of Sydney in Australia. He's also a member of the board of directors for TESOL International. And today he's known as Professor Nomad, and he is speaking with us from Queensland. Welcome, Dr. Mahbub.
Good morning, Jessica. It's like 7 o'clock here in Queensland, and it's a beautiful day. I'm actually in my motorhome because it's very cold outside, so I would rather be inside. Just a quick sort of update. I used to be a member of the board of directors of TESOL. I am no longer part of TESOL. In fact, I mean, I support all my TESOL friends and people, but I'm not really as much interested in TESOL as I used to be at one point in time. And perhaps during the interview, we can talk about that as well. But thank you so much. Also, just to add, I wouldn't call subaltern linguistics a brand of linguistics at all, because in a sense, subaltern is the idea of a non-brand. It's the idea that there is no branded linguistics. Anybody can do linguistics, because anybody who has an understanding of how language and symbols operate can do this work. They don't need to necessarily be a linguist. So I would say that it's an anti-brand in a sense.
I like the way you describe it. So since we're starting with subalternism, can you tell us more about subalternism?
Well, it's a very complex question, and there is a lot of history in the term of subaltern. And you know, it's a good question to ask. Why did I choose subaltern in the kind of work that I'm doing? Because I'm actually not necessarily drawing on subaltern theory. I really appreciate the work that they have done, and the subaltern theory, the work that they have done is incredible, but I'm not drawing on it for the simple reason that I'm not interested in theory. I'm interested in the practice and the application. And therefore, it isn't the theoretical premises or the history of things that are of interest to me. What is of interest to me is present. And in present, the actions that we can take that can allow us to sort of regain some of the independence and the freedom and the respect that people from my part of the world used to have, but have lost over the years. So that to the degree that the very idea of schooling, when I think of schooling in Pakistan, regardless of what type of schooling, I see that as a long-term experience of the effacing or the disappearance of a person's self-respect and self-ability. So the school, in fact, the educational system in Pakistan and other exploiting countries, it strips an individual of their ability rather than making them able. And this is largely done through the use of language as an exploitative tool, because people don't understand what language is. And because people don't understand what language is, they are often fooled and tricked into these wrong understandings of language, which are then led to which mislead them into taking on practices that are actually harmful to them rather than helpful to them.
Well, it's amazing that you talk about it in that way. And when we're working with linguists, it's easy to get all wrapped up in that lingo that we use. But yesterday you were talking about different language usage and how English is the language of a colonizer. And so if we're only using English, then there are people who we're excluding by default. And can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes. So I'm just fixing the light. I think it's a bit funny with the light in the sun coming up. It's a bit too bright on my face. But if I turn it off, then it's dark. Let me see if I can figure out something here. I've never really done this session from indoors, so.
While you're figuring that out,
okay, all right, I'll just leave it this. Like, we'll have to just work with this. I'm sorry. It's like I'm going to be like a bandicoot with bands of shadow and light on my face. That's all right. Okay, so That's a great question, Jessica. Let me start this with let us think about it not from a let's think about what language is. And I want to start off by saying that let's start from the point for a second at least. Let's say that everything that we know about language erased. Let's just erase it. We don't know anything about language, right? Let's
Okay.
say that we want to create a category of language and we don't have it. Now, there are multiple ways. There are literally hundreds of ways that one can go about doing it. And one way of doing it is to say that, all right, let's say that humans have some ways in which they use language that other animals and creatures don't. Oh, so let's say humans have language and non-humans have communication systems. Now, notice this is the approach that the dominant ways of doing linguistics have taken. Language is seen as a human only entity, right? Now, in other way terms, this is a bit of a technical term, but the idea of anthropocentrism, the idea that we anthropo being human and centrism to words, so creating sciences and creating thinkings and ways of thinking in which we think from a human perspective and for the benefit of the human being. So it's anthropocentric. So linguistics is essentially an anthropocentric science. And by that definition, it's a problem because that means it's by definition, it is flawed because you cannot have a way of studying something which is only designed for humans and the benefit of humans. Why? Because we live in a world that is interconnected with other species. When we see humans as being better, as a biological system and we see other biological systems as inferior, then we have no problem in putting them into farms, killing them, doing what we want to do, pushing them off the land, deforestation. So if you see up behind me, you can see all of it is this plain, right? You don't actually see any trees anymore. Why? This used to be a tropical rainforest only 150 years ago. There is not a single tropical rainforest tree left. There is not a single tropical rainforest species left. It's all gone, right? So where has it gone? It hasn't gone somewhere else. It's dead. It's dead. It's gone means it's been killed. Now notice this notion. And how can we do this? We do this through a continuous justification that humans are superior to non-human beings. And I don't agree with that. And linguistics as a discipline is guilty of supporting anthropocentric thinking and making humans superior. Because actually, when you live in the bush and when you live in nature and with the beasts and with the birds, you realize that actually we all interact with each other. Even though we are guests in this land, because this land belongs to the animals and the creatures that live here, the kangaroos and the iguanas and whatever, parrots and lorikeets and cockatoos and whatever lives here, this land belongs to them. So if I am here, I am their guest, and as a guest I need to respect them and I need to understand them. And once you do that, you realize that this other species that live here don't want to kill you. They're happy to share with you. They will give you your space and let you live and let you be part of their network. But guess what? As humans, we are not like that. We don't just want to live and cohabit. We want to take control and make this our own, right? And that's where the problems start evolving. Now this ties all in with language. I know we are sort of running into out of time. Now once you start realizing how language is misconstrued and you start re-understanding and redefining and rethinking what language really is and how it connects to different species, then you start to see a world through not as a speciesist orientation but as an interspecies connection and a network, which is what the world used to be until for some reason the human greed just destroyed everything. And that's the greed that we have to sort of resist through our educational programs, through the kind of educational activities that we create and develop, and through understanding how through education we want to create a community that has a sense of interrelationship
Yeah.
of mutual connectivity,
Yes.
not just between the humans, but across the species. Um, I'm so just sorry, Jessica. I think there is a question here as well.
Yes, this comes from Himdad Muhammad, who is an English teacher in Kurdistan. And he would like to know from your perspective, what do you think the future of language is? Are we moving towards one language or more diverse languages? Thank you, Himdad.
Yes, very good question. And a short answer to it is that there can never be one language, because language is always responsive to the needs of the people who use it. And a language is always responsive to the geographical and other elements that you find in your context. So, because humans are all different, they have different needs that they use language for. They use language in different contexts with different environments around them. So, in a sense, language can never really be the one language, and that's the part of the problem, right? Notice how there's a constant pressure through education of towards universalities, right? The whole idea of a universal grammar, for example, is inherently flawed. Any kind of universal based thinking is inherently flawed, and yet you see that the educational institutions want us to move towards it, but it's not a natural movement. So
No.
you can, right, exactly, so you see resistance to it, and you don't see it really taking place.
Yeah, a really good example of that, Amar, is when we talk about how world English has changed. And when Katru first started it, they were all thinking that the US and Australia were at the center of the English world. And that's not true. If you're in India, you don't need the English that I speak in Ohio. You need the English or version of English. So it's a much more dispersed
So
model, which demonstrates multiple languages.
So let's rephrase this, Jessica. I think you are on absolutely right, on saying that we don't need X type of English or Y type of English. But notice when we are giving these labels, and Kachru is a part of this group of people who give these labels. We're giving nation-based labels. We're giving nation-based labels. What does it mean, Indian English? Indian English is not a single English. What does it mean, American English or British English or Australian English? Australian English on this campsite where I am is very different from the Australian English I hear from my students on campus, right? But it's
Right.
still all Australian English. So, I mean, this idea of this unified single idea of a language is a myth. It doesn't exist. It's an abstraction. It's a myth. It's an abstraction. There is no real basis to it. And that's one of the things that I keep saying to people. There are two ways in which we can try to build knowledge. We can build knowledge through observation and analysis and understanding, right, or you can build knowledge on reading and reading. Now, for me, reading is a resource which is very useful, but if that is your only tool for knowledge building, you are way out of the world. You have no understanding of anything, because subjects, disciplines don't exist in isolation. They exist in relation to everything else that is physical and observable in the world. Now, notice a lot of the stuff that we read in books, none of it is observable. We cannot actually know if it's true or not. We just simply have to believe that the person who's writing this is honest, and we can believe them. Why should we? Imagine this. This is really, I think this is probably, I know we're running out of time, and this
It's okay.
observation,
It's okay. Don't
I
worry.
will I will leave you with an observation, and perhaps we can catch up with this later on. In living in nature, one of the things that we have observed is that for every species, pretty much, the young ones are taken care of by the elders of the same species. It
Yeah.
doesn't always have to be a biological parent, but it always has to be the same species that will take care of them in the same herd. Will take care of them. The same herd will take care of the young ones, right? So, and they will stay together until the young one is fully independent and moves on, right? The parents, the parents of a being in the wild, in the beast of the wild, will never send their young one to another member of their own species to become their teacher. No,
I
right?
have, yeah.
Right? Like a buffalo, a sheep, a cow will never send its young one to another cow. Hey, look after my cow and educate it. No, they will always educate it themselves in nature. I'm not talking about on farms, right? Because that's not natural. In nature. But notice what humans do. We have a child. By the year, their time they're 2.5, 3, we ship them off to somebody else, and those people are going to teach them through reading and writing and
Yeah.
listening,
I get it.
which are
Yeah.
which are not even observable. So we a very early age, we are actually putting children at a risk of being lied to in a context where observation cannot teach them, and they have to memorize and show off that false knowledge through examinations and tests in order to succeed in life. And therefore their observations are lost. They cannot see anything. They're lost in this world that is created through texts, which is bizarre and weird, and not real in any sense. But that's the world we live in. And so, in a sense, before this session, we were talking about Congo and people in Congo, or Pakistan, you could say. That's the problem of it. They can't see things in front of them because they have been so
Brainwash.
miseducated
Yeah.
for generations and generations, that their cognitive abilities, which are sharpened through language and other socio-semiotic systems, especially what I call group B of our sensory systems.
Yes.
Group B sensory systems are smell, touch, and taste. These three sensory systems are key in early childhood development and education. And notice, when we take a child away and then send them off to a kindergarten or a preschool, or a school of any kind, or we're essentially breaking away their ability to learn from those group B sensory systems within a home environment, which is essential for human development. Now, why did I come to this conclusion or this understanding? It's not by observing humans. It's actually by observing bush rats,
Really?
right? Yes. It's really interesting. I
I
would,
gotta hear about this.
this will have to be another story,
Okay.
but yeah, but it's actually it's the observation of species that are not us,
Yes.
but are like us, right? So this is an interesting continuum. Our understanding of a species varies on a very interesting note. It typically varies on how close or different that species is to us. The closer it is, the more we seem to sense an understanding of it. The more distant it gets, the less we understand it. So, for example, trees and plants, we don't understand them much at all because they're so different from us. We know they're living, but they're so different, we have no understanding. But notice, indigenous people, when they did not understand, they would leave it. They will mystify it, and they will just walk away. The modern human does not do that. The modern human will go with a chainsaw and cut it and study it in dissecting it. And
That's not,
through that, it destroys the environment. And through that, it kills a tree, right?
and they call
That's
it objective logic.
There is no objectivity to it when
I
when
know,
you see the world that is disappearing.
right?
But anyway, thanks so much again, Jessica. It's been
You know,
wonderful. I know we didn't talk about all the things we wanted to.
well, I think we're going to have you back, and but before we go, I'm wondering if you can share one good sample project that came out of subalternism that's not a
Oh,
label.
there's a lots of them. So, for example, one of them is an example where I worked with some colleagues in Malaysia and some of my own students and friends, and we set up this thing called language travels. So essentially, an indigenous community in Malaysia, we supported them in creating resources for that they can use to teach language to others. And then they created a 3-day language teaching program in country, where people came and learned language. And essentially all the money that was raised stayed with the community. And
Wonderful.
the children and the teachers for that program were not adults, they were kids. They were the kids of the community. So
Local.
through that, the children developed a huge sense of self-confidence and self-respect, that their language is worth something. It's
Absolutely.
something that people want to learn, as opposed to them going to school and then being told they cannot speak their language.
Yeah, very
So in school they're suppressed, and we're trying to, in reverse, we empower them. So that's just one example,
right.
and I think it's a model that I hope that other people sort of take on. And it's also, notice, it's a way of generating an economy through your language. right? So your language or your mother tongue, your indigenous language, becomes the thing that creates the economic benefit for you. So then, instead of leaving it, you want to protect it, right? And that's one of the key things about the way I think about subaltern linguistics, is that documenting language doesn't help language, because it's not languages that die or not die, it's the people who stop using language. So you don't have the focus on languages is wrong. The focus needs to be on the people. So we need to think about, how do people become stronger? The reason that people are abandoning their language is there are no economic ways for them to maintain their language, right? So if we are able to help them and think about, or they can think about ways in which they can use their language to generate an income. So for example, I'll give you another example. Let's work with the local governments and the local city councils and the local district level governments, and put signage
Yes.
about the environment, about the the trees, about the birds, about cleanliness, about health, about all these things. And let's write these messages in local languages, as well as a language of you know a wider communication. And the local language can be an indigenous language, right?
So the
And a
people are
wider
using it.
Right, exactly. And a language of wider communication can also vary. So, for example, in KP, it can be Pashto, and the local language can be Turvali, right? So you have Turvali and Pashto. But in Sindh, it can be Sindhi and Urdu, right? It can vary. In interior Sindh, it can be Thari and Sindhi, right? So these can be multilingual. They can also have a third language if they want. Now, these signs can be created by the students, by the educationists, by our
Absolutely.
researchers, and the government has funds, right, for these things, and they give these funds, they support the schools. So essentially the school and the school generates a fund, and the community gets a service, and the government gets to use the funds in a way that it educates its citizens, as part of the whole process through which they are re-harmonizing their societies and communities, and bringing the balance back. South Asia, people talk about how rich it was. I'm not talking about, I'm not interested in rich and economics. I just, it was a harmonious place. People didn't fight and kill each other in names of language and religion or whatever. Notice all of these categories through which we now kill each other were introduced through English. English brings the categories of language and religion and family, all these terms that we borrow into our own language, and we use family planning in Urdu now, and we use, religious leaders in Urdu. Borrow all these terms. But these words are not from our parts of the world. And
Okay.
these concepts that have been borrowed are leading to conflicts and divisions that are leading us to where we are. So moving this into looking at coming back into language,
I
how do
have
we
to cut you off.
re-understand
I'm
these things?
sorry,
Sorry,
Mark.
yeah, sorry.
I
Yeah.
have to cut you out. We're out of time. So maybe we'll make this a weekly session. I'm glad, I'm glad we got to hear one awesome story. And I would love to answer other questions, but we will maybe next week. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, thank you. Fantastic questions. Maybe if you guys send me these questions, I will start with them next week. All
Okay,
right. Thank you
awesome.
so much. Great.
Thank you, Omar.
Ciao.
Bye.
Take care. Ciao.